Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our talk about the recent FDA-approved COVID-19 vaccines. For those who don't know me, I'm Johanna Cia Hernandez, one of the pediatric pulmonologists at Helen DeVos Children's Hospital. I would like to thank you, all of you, for being here today. We are very excited to share some time with our CF families. And as you know, we are trying a different format and time today, so please feel free to give us any feedback that you have for us. We hope this is valuable for you today, and we think it's a very, very important topic right now. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you may have. First, we would like to give a very special thanks to our Cystic Fibrosis Foundation Michigan chapter for all their help in planning and hosting this event. And also, I would like to thank our wonderful Helen DeVos team for being part of this event today too. None of this will be possible without the fabulous work of each one of our team members. So today, we have the privilege of having Dr. Nicholas Harchuck joining us. Dr. Harchuck is an assistant professor of MSU. He's also the head of the Pediatric and Adult Primary Immunodeficiency Clinic. He joined Helen DeVos in 2016, and he has been working with his team very close with us. We really trust his expertise. Dr. Hartog is very active in research, and he's currently not only the principal investigator of some of the studies, but also he's part of all the studies that we are doing on Spectrum Health to help patients with COVID. So thank you, Dr. Hartog, for being here today, and welcome.
Thank you for having me on here today. I'll just wait for the presentation to get up and we'll get going. There we go. So, and then are we able to put that in presentation mode? All right. No, okay, we'll just go ahead. So we can go on to the next slide here. And so I have no disclosures or anything, any conflicts of interest here. As Dr. Zia Hernandez says, I am involved in quite a bit of the research here at Helen DeVos and at Spectrum Health in regards to COVID-19, but nothing that's funded or there would be a conflict right now. Can we go to the next slide? Could we do the next slide?
Is it showing on there? I have shown on my screen the central dogma.
Ooh, it is not. No, at least not for me.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. Okay, how about
perfect?
Now? Okay, great.
That's perfect. All right, so I wanted to start out with just talking a little bit about how our cells function in an effort to understand the mRNA vaccines that are currently approved, so we can understand what's new and what's different about that. And I do a lot of this thinking, and when we talk about these kind of processes, I think showing pictures is really helpful. Not showing pictures to focus on all the details that would be in the slides, but just to use it as a model when we're talking. So when we talk about the central dogma of biology, just in general, specifically eukaryotic cells, when we say eukaryotic animals, so humans, and it talks about how we replicate, how we store our information, and how we use that information to perform different tasks. And so we have the DNA in the cell, in every single cell in the nucleus. What that DNA is it contains all the information that makes you, you. We tell people it's kind of like a book. And within that book, we have chapters. We have, within those chapters, we have paragraphs, then we have sentences, and then we have words. And within each chapter, it's going to tell a different story and it's going to tell a different thing to do. And within that, we can have different problems that can come out of it also. And so we can have a chapter that can be deleted. We can have a paragraph that's switched around, a word that's misspelled, different typos. And some of those won't take away from the story that's being told, but some of them very much will take away from it. And without that piece of information, you won't be able to get the correct story out. It's kind of the same in our cells here. And so we have this DNA, and every single cell in your body should have, for all intents and purposes, the same DNA. And then what that does is it's going to turn it into RNA, and specifically mRNA, and it's going to what we call transcribe into this mRNA, which is just a different thing to message. And then we're going to translate that into proteins. The proteins in your body are what perform every single task in your body. It's what how you digest things. It's what makes your hair a certain color. It's what makes you you. In relation to cystic fibrosis, a defective CFTR protein is what really drives that disease process too. And so this is how every single cell works. And so we take this DNA that stores all of our information, then we transcribe, the cells will a certain part of it to perform a certain task, make the mRNA, then we'll form protein and it'll perform that task. And so that's really the big overview. We can go to the next slide. All right, so then take a step back and talk about the mRNA vaccines. Right now, the reason why I'm focusing on the mRNA, I should say, is those are the two vaccines that are approved right now. One is from the company called Pfizer, and one is from a company called Moderna. And they are, well, Pfizer right now is approved for people over the age of 16, and Moderna right now is over the age of 18. And so that is important to know that for a lot of you, under the age of 18, there isn't a available vaccine right now, and that's still in clinical trials. And so that is important to know. And there are other vaccines in the pipeline, and I was reading something this weekend actually that a few of them the FDA thinks that they'll bring before the FDA in the coming weeks to end middle to end of February. But right now they're not reality, and so I'm not focusing as much on those. So, but one of the things that with a new technology, which the mRNA vaccine is a new technology, comes a little bit of fear from people. And one of those fears is not only it being new, but how long has this been around? How much have we researched this? What do we really know about this vaccine? So if we look at that, it was really, mRNA was discovered in the 60s. We thought that we could use it for therapeutics in the 90s. Figured out how to make itself amplify. What that means is make more of itself in the 90s. And then really in the early 2000s was the first time we started doing human trials on mRNA vaccines. A lot of the focus has been around cancer vaccines, that if we can vaccinate someone and that we can use their immune system to attack their own cancer. And that has been in trials since the early 2000s. And then in 2007, there was other things to do that made the mRNA more stable, because one of the big issues with the vaccine in the early stages is the mRNA just really is something that's hard to work with, and it's something that breaks down very easily. And so that was one thing that they had to overcome. And going on from there really has been a focus on using this as a personalized immunotherapy. And there was interest in the first two coronavirus outbreaks in the SARS-1 and the MERS in using this as a potential vaccine, but it never went to clinical trials. And the reason why it didn't was not because of any issues with the vaccine, but because those outbreaks just fizzled and they just went away, and they ended up not being a big issue, unlike obviously what's going on now. And then the other thing is that with this, there have been thousands of patients since the early 2000s that have gotten various forms of the mRNA vaccine that we have followed over about 15 years. Can we go to the next slide? So then when we look at, well, let's look at this last year well, what has happened in this last year to get us to where we are now. So In December 2019, debatable exactly what date, but the first cases were reported in Wuhan, China. Um, the NIH, about 10 days later, was able to publish the genetic sequencing for this new virus, which is just phenomenal that they were able to do this in 10 days. And then on that date, the meeting, if you listen to some interviews from Dr. Fauci, this is when he said, all hands on deck, we need to focus on making a vaccine for this. Well, 3 days later, a couple companies decided on a specific sequence of the mRNA to focus on for making this vaccine. They started making it. Then they did some validation, and within a month, they were starting trials in mice already. Within a month from the announcement of the viral sequencing. From there, about 2 weeks later, the initial mouse study started coming out. And they got the thumbs up from the FDA about 2 months after the first sequencing. Okay, this is safe to proceed with human trials. And then about 9 weeks after the initial start, we have phase 1 trials, which for those of you who don't know, phase 1 is the initial human studies, and it's typically focused around what we call dose ranging, figuring out the right doses, and it's checking on different parameters. It's usually a very small study. And then phase 2 trials are started in May, and that's when we really start looking at safety and efficacy in those larger phase 2 trials. And then I believe it was June or July, I don't have it in here, the phase 3 trial started at that point. And those are the ones that eventually did show the safety and efficacy that led to this emergency approval by the FDA now, gosh, it's about a month ago. All right, can we go to the next slide? So with that, what ends up happening is with this immune response is you have a needle, you have your vaccine, and what is injected is mRNA. And this mRNA, it has some lipid particles around it. And the things that are surrounding are really to help stabilize the mRNA so it doesn't break down. Then it's going to come into these cells called dendritic cells. Those dendritic cells are then going to sense that RNA, and it's going to, if we go back to the first slide that we said, what does mRNA do? Well, it makes proteins. So then it's going to make a protein in your cell, and these dendritic cells are going to present that protein to other cells in the immune system, and that's going to start an immune response and help you to be protected from that. And they make a protein that's specific for a certain part of the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus. And can we go to the next slide? Actually, let's go to the next slide. We'll skip this one. All right. So this is, when we really think of it, what I'm trying to get across here is the different ways that vaccines are being pursued for the coronavirus or the COVID-19. One is these mRNA, where you start with this mRNA, then you make a protein, the viral protein in the body. Your body then presents that to the immune cells. You form a response to it. There's other ways you can do it where you just inject the protein into the body, and the whole vaccine is just the protein already into the body, and then you form an immune response. And then there's other ones, you actually have a viral vector, and so a killed virus that will then also present that viral protein or make that viral protein in the body, then your body forms an immune response. And so these last two and three are more what we call the classic vaccine approaches that have been around for a while. And I did hint at 2 other vaccines that are in the pipeline that will probably be hitting the FDA for decisions in February, and that's, I believe it's Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca are the companies, but I may be forgetting the companies, but they are both viral vector vaccines, and more the classic vaccines there, and so they're the next ones up. But one of the reasons why the mRNA we shall stock it was the quote unquote winner or the first one to hit the market is this is really what it was developed for, is developed to have this backbone, and then just you insert the specific mRNA that you need, and then you can quickly develop a vaccine to an emerging infectious disease. So that's really one of the big things that when they've been studying it for the last 15, 20 years, that they've hoped it would accomplish. And this year, if anything, proved that, yeah, all that work in the last 15, 20 years accomplished what they were looking for. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So really, when we're talking about the comparisons, as I kind of talked about that, is we have this mRNA. So we have the precursor to a protein versus actually having the protein or something inactive. The production is actually a lot faster. And the process of actually injecting it is very similar. Go on to the next slide. So some of the side effects, and this is, you probably can't even read all this, and that's okay. But the side effects from the mRNA vaccines are something I think are important to focus on for a second. And that after the first shot, and probably the most common side effects are a little bit of fatigue, a little bit of headache, sometimes fevers, body aches, and they will happen about 24 to 48 hours after it, and will disappear within about 12 to 24 hours. I can tell you personally, I felt a little fatigued, a little bit of headache after my first one. It was gone within that 24 hours. Right now, I can tell you I am about 36 hours post my second vaccine. I feel a little achy today, but that's about it. We have had some colleagues that will have a fever and will really feel like they're starting to come down with something for that short little period of time, and then things go away pretty quickly. So I do think we need to be forthright that feeling a little bit from a robust, or a little bit ill from a robust immune response, 24 to 36 hours afterwards, is probably happens in anywhere between 30 to 60% of people. But beyond that, they did not see any significant side effects. Go to the next slide. And then this is one thing that I wanted to touch on too, is if you're watching the news at all, is that they really have been sensationalizing, like the news does for anything these days, the potential for allergic reactions. And specifically, if you watched the first day in the UK that they started doing vaccines, they had, I think, 2 reactions the first day, and the UK health minister came out and said some incorrect things, that anybody with a severe reaction to basically anything, or any allergy, so a peanut allergy, should exclude you from getting a vaccine. And really that's untrue. When we think about it, and when you look at and what the recommendations currently are from the allergy societies, is if you've had an allergic reaction to the first vaccine, or you've had an allergic reaction to something called PEG, which can be found in different injectable medications, then we should be a little bit nervous. Well, not nervous. Then we should evaluate with a allergist to decide what the best thing to do from there is. But really, a prior reaction to the vaccine, so reaction to your first vaccine, is the only reason to really do any further evaluation. With that, when we really look at the reported reactions that are out there, and whether they were true allergic reactions, the rate right now is probably between 5 and 10 reactions per million shots. And so really not that common. And we'll see as more come out where that rate officially settles at. In comparison, the rate of a allergic or anaphylactic reaction to a flu vaccine is about 1 in 1.3 million shots. So right now we're a touch more common than the flu vaccine, but still really, really rare to have an allergic reaction to this vaccine. All right, can we go to the next slide? And that is it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. I learned a ton, and I am not very scientifically minded, so that was fantastic. We are now open for questions, so please feel free to either put them in the chat, or you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally instead, whatever you would prefer. And I do have one question to start out with that was sent to me ahead of time. One of the parents was wondering, since Pfizer's approved down to the age of 16, do we know if Spectrum Health will be rolling that out down to age of 16 soon? Because currently they're only rolling it out down to age 18?
So I actually don't know those exact details, whether we are. And we should talk about the down to age 16 indication is the studies currently with the Pfizer one studied only down to age 18. And when we looked at the approval by the FDAs, there's 3 people who voted against approval. And those 3 people, their objection was not anything to do with the science or anything we talked about today. Their objection was about approving it in 16 and 17-year-olds without having data on 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, everybody else's argument was, is a 16 or 17-year-old really that different than an 18-year-old? I tend to be in that, probably not, and which is why in the end it got approved down to age 16. But I think we should be very clear that we don't have trials down to 16 yet. But with that, I actually am not sure about the plans. I can bring that back to our committee about what when they're planning to release down to 16. I know we are in the late phases of joining up one of the trials for adolescents, 12 to 18-year-old. So I know one of the clinical trials will be starting here, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions?
I did want to just mention that the vaccine plans are not up to us, but the government. And they tell us, they give us so many shipments of vaccine. Each location, even for employees at high risk, like Spectrum downtown has Pfizer. Another smaller Spectrum facility might have Mrna. So even us working here can't pick what type of vaccine we get. So that's part of the reason why it's very confusing about how fast things are being released and to what levels. Right now, I think the government is at 1B. So like teachers, the elderly can get it on in addition to healthcare workers at high risk. So we wish we knew more, but we don't.
Yeah, and it looks like Dr. Schoen put in here, how can families get involved with the clinical trial if they're interested in participating?
So Dr. Schoen, I'm not sure, but I was going to send an email to Dr. Olivero, who's one of our infectious disease specialists here. And I know she's the one heading up the trial, and she's probably the one that would know about the plans for rolling it out to 16-year-olds, or if we're planning to just keep it within the trial, because that's not something I've thought about. So good questions, but I'll follow up, and Dr. Schoen, I can include you in the email so you can have the answer to be able to disperse it the best way.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Harchuck. This was so wonderful. Thank you for taking the time, and I think we all learned a lot. And please, to our families, if you have any feedback, if you like this format, this time, or if you have any other suggestions, we would like to keep doing this if you think it's valuable for you. And if you have any topics that you would like to discuss here, please let us know.
Yeah, and I'll send out the recording on the parent email list once it's ready. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have any questions, once I send that out, feel free to send them back. And if we're able to get those answered, we'll send out those answers.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
Thanks
to
so
see
much,
you
Nick.
all.
Thanks, Johanna. Great job at emceeing today. Woo!
Bye.
Well
Have a
done.
wonderful week.
You guys take care.